Hi, I'm Nick Shell, and I assume you're watching this video for the right reason. The right reason being that I just recorded a song, and this video is to explain what inspired me to write that song. So it'd be weird if you're watching this and haven't seen me do the song yet, but I'll make it easy for you. There's a link right there. You can click, and there you can watch me perform this song that just moments ago I recorded. So it's funny because the main inspiration for me writing this song was I looked back and thought, how many songs have I written this year in 2022? And I looked and the answer was 11. I thought, how about I do one more? How about I just write another song real quick? And that way it can feel like I have one that represents, at least in theory, every month of this year in some kind of progression. And also for me, looking at it, if this were an album, I like the idea of 12 songs on an album instead of just 11. So for me, that was my inspiration. I wrote this song quite quickly, and yet it's so representative of what I've learned about myself this year, what I've taught myself. And of course, this ultimately is a channel about me being an Enneagram coach, and this would ultimately be the anthem of what it means to be a counterphobic 6. With that being said, I'm sure a lot of people could relate to this song. If you're Enneagram 1, you have that inner critic in you. You probably deal with that a lot. Even if you're a 7, like with my wife, when you go to a stressed place, you become more like that 1 and you become really hard on yourself. So I want to read these lyrics and then I want to explain exactly what I mean by them. So again, I wrote this a week or two ago just on a whim. It just came out all at once. It was way too easy because it's taken me a solid year of reading books, making videos, studying this thing to understand what's really going on inside. So let me go ahead and read the lyrics and then I'll explain specifically what inspired this. Here we go. It's called Shadow Self. I was kind to the world, but not to myself, like somehow I deserved less. Classic Stockholm Syndrome, the captor and the victim. I've allowed myself to be released. My shadow self has been redeemed. Inside of me is inner peace. Can I finally feel complete like Saturn and its 7 rings? Is that the way I really sound? It's weird to hear your own voice. Is that the way I really sound to everyone else? It's strange to see your own face. Is that the way I really look to everyone else? And then to the second verse, I used to be a scared little boy pretending not to be afraid. I convinced everyone I was brave. My counterphobic tactic saved me for the past 3 decades. I fooled myself more than anyone. And then the final verse, verse 3, this is me saying how I feel at the end of another year. In my mind, the smoke is cleared as the fear is disappearing. So there's the whole song. So here's what I've gone through in the last year to understand myself. Again, it was exactly a year ago that I got certified for Enneagram, and I've really studied this thing hard. And people who know me well can easily make fun of me for, quote, changing my Enneagram number. And ultimately, if there was ever a very difficult person to understand and analyze from an Enneagram perspective, it definitely would be me. So officially, I am a 6, but I'm the counterphobic 6. So an Enneagram 6 is someone who ultimately, what drives them in life is fear. Fear of physical harm, separation, that sort of thing. But there's a counterphobic version of that, which is, well, I'm not afraid of that. I'm going to prove I'm not afraid of that. So then they act not afraid of that, and they convince themselves they're not afraid of that thing, and now they're not afraid. And they convince everyone, including themselves. What's funny is I kicked into that mode 30 years ago in '92 when I was like in 5th grade. That's when I started changing over. And so, here I am at age 41 realizing, wow, I've lived the last 30 years of my life pretending not to be afraid, and it worked. But now I'm realizing that this is my first time to revisit that version of myself. Now, part of what inspired this song also was me watching the documentary on Netflix called Stutz, where Jonah Hill interviews his psychiatrist. I highly recommend it. And he talks about the shadow self. He says, who is that little boy that you've abandoned? What would he say to you? And it took me a while, but when I got to the point I could understand it, I remembered, people don't remember me this way, but when I was a little boy, when I was in preschool, the younger elementary years, I was quiet. I didn't talk. And I kept hearing everyone tell me, whether it was at school or church or family members, Nick, you're so quiet. Why do you never talk? What's the matter? A cat got your tongue? So when you hear that for year after year as a young child, eventually you think, well, do I not matter to people? Am I invisible? Am I insignificant? So if I learn to talk more, then people will like me. And that's exactly ultimately what I ended up doing. I got into acting and theater and public speaking, business club, got an English degree. All of these things that would put me in front of people speaking and not being afraid of public speaking, which is one of the number of fears in the world. That's not my fear. So that's interesting that most people's top fear, or second top fear, which is public speaking, is totally not my fear at all. But again, that's counterphobic. That's addressing the fear and overcoming that. So that's ultimately what happened. I was a scared little boy, and by that I'll give you an example. 3 different times I can immediately think of as a kid, I was at a spend the night party and I got scared and had my friends' parents call my parents, and then they had to pick me up. I mean, that sort of stuff was happening throughout my life. So it was this fear of separation ultimately, I think, more than anything. And I learned to overcome that. I learned to overcome it by being more assertive and learning how to speak more assertively, how to act more assertively. And it goes back to Steve Martin on Comedians Cars Getting Coffee, where he tells Jerry Seinfeld, and Steve Martin is a 6, and Jerry Seinfeld as well, no one can tell the difference between real confidence and fake confidence. So it's just weird. Imagine being me at age 41 and digging so deep, thinking, oh, I'm this person. First I thought I was a 3, and then I thought I was an 8 and a 7 and a 4. Well, guess what? I am all of those things ultimately. A 6 is a chameleon. They can easily become these other things in the name of security to the people in their life, to feel secure. But who's the real person underneath all of that? It's ultimately this person who's afraid but pretending not to be. So that's what I came to understand about myself this year through studying Enneagram and becoming certified, and understanding that I am the true stereotypical definition of what it means to be a counterphobic 6. So just in looking at these lyrics again, I was kind of myself, I was kind of the world but not to myself, like somehow I deserved less. See, part of that to get me through that counterphobic part, that scared little boy had to go away, and this stronger version had to come out. Like in Fight Club, it's the same concept. But what happened is over time, that stronger version became too overpowering, and then we couldn't see the person buried underneath somewhere that never actually went away. So Fight Club is a great analogy of what I've gone through. It's a classic Stockholm syndrome. So a lot of people are not familiar with this term, but ultimately, I guess back in the 70s, there was this guy in Stockholm, Sweden, whatever country that is, and he kidnapped these people, and the people who were being kidnapped ultimately looked to him for security. They actually confided in him and didn't try to escape when they had the chance. You can see how my shadow self is ultimately that scared little boy who learned to find comfort in a braver version of myself, but then that version came too strong. And then I released myself of that, and I realized ultimately I am both people. I'm this scared little boy, and then I'm this overcompensating man. And somewhere in between that balance is who I actually am. So then I say, my shadow self has been redeemed. The scared little boy and the overpowering man, they've been redeemed. Inside of me is inner peace. That's much how I get to inner peace there. Can I finally feel complete like Saturn and its 7 rings? And I ultimately created that line because it already kind of sounded like the same way I said the first part. Inside of me is inner peace, like Saturn and its 7 rings. It sounds very similar. So a lot of times when I write songs, I'm not trying to rhyme. I'm just trying to make things sound similar. Sometimes that's more important than rhyming. So I said, it's weird to hear your own voice. Is that the way I really sound to everyone else? It's strange to see your own face. Is that the way I really look to everyone else? This made me think of back in like 1990 when our family got a camcorder, VHS, and for the first time we all like, that's how I sound and that's how I actually look. Because you can't see your own face. You can't really hear your own voice the way others hear it. But on a camera, it kind of gives that impression. And I feel like the reason I put this as the main kind of chorus of the song this is me for the first time realizing, oh, that is how I sound to the rest of the world. That's how I look to the rest of the world. They see me in a way that I can't even see myself. And as I've explained this version of myself to my wife and my family, they're like, well, I kind of always knew that about you. Well, I didn't. I fooled myself. So I've covered the part about me being a scared little boy, being counterphobic, and how it's worked the last 3 decades. And so then, yeah, the song ends with me saying this, here at the end of the year, I realized this is how I feel. It is like, the smoke is cleared in my mind. Like I can actually see what's actually going on. And ultimately this fear is starting to disappear. I mean, one of the things that in the last couple of years that I've dealt with and struggled with is this concept of this fear of going to hell no matter what I do, no matter what I believe, however, I'm going to end up in hell. And I think I understand this better. That's that inner critic being so strong, so hard on myself that I can't be okay with being at peace, that ultimately I turn God into someone who doesn't even accept me because I can't accept myself. And I think that's probably where that comes from. So I think a lot of my perceived problems are caused by me giving too much power to that alter ego. So again, I am somewhere between that scared little boy and the overpowering alter ego. I'm somewhere in the middle. And now I have the rest of my life to understand and accept that. And I'm so grateful that I was able to write this song to understand that. And hopefully there are other people who can relate to that. Maybe you're not a 6 like I am, but on some level, maybe you're a number 1 where you're a reformer, perfectionist, and you're really hard on yourself. You're kind to everyone except for yourself. If so, I just realized that about myself, and now I can be free of that. And hopefully life inside of here can be a lot easier. Thanks for watching this 12-minute video. And again, if you want to check out the song, the link is right there.